Hello, all. I wanted to get on and talk a little bit about the root chakra, just a little bit more, just to take us a layer deeper. It's really such an important gateway overall. And I want to talk about, from a mystical perspective and a um, practical perspective, why that is, why it's so important. So, if we were to think, like we've talked a little bit about Saturn and Capricorn and Aquarius, and we've also talked about the symbolism of an axis or a tree. And we've used this symbolism to really kind of talk to us about our overarching journey, right? How we've been going like down the toroidal field or down the tree. So we started in the crown and the branches. We've been making our way down this kind of vertical axis, and then we get to the root. And so one of the things that I think is really neat about the root and how the root chakra is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn being this kind of like energy that coalesces around the central pole, whereas Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, yes, but it also has the co-ruler of Uranus. And Uranus is very related to that idea of Kundalini, or this idea of awakening, right? And when we feel into what spirituality is, this kind of spiritual red thread that we're tugging at, there's a lot of symbolism that comes to us through this idea of the tree and the snake, right? It's in Genesis in the Bible. It's in our Lilith story from the Zohar. It's in so much of our mystical symbolism. And essentially, what the tree is the sense of erectness, right? Or in Kundalini, it's the spine. Or we might even think of that as like a masculine principle, although I want you to keep in mind it's just a principle. And that the snake is, in essence, eros, right? It is the idea of like when we think of Kundalini, we see those like that double helix kind of crossing, right? And that is eros. That is the erotic current of life force that lives through us. And when we're having an awakening, right? Essentially, that starts down in the root, down at the base of the spine, right where the root begins. And the Kundalini makes its way up and around the central pole. And both of these elements are necessary for I don't know if we should call it productive awakening, so that we don't end up having like an awakening that causes psychosis. And I know that it happens. Like there are times when the Kundalini energy comes up and it causes so much of the unconscious contents to come forward that, we almost appear psychotic, or we feel like we're having a psychic break. And in my form of spirituality, right? Which as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I'm really, some of the foundational principles I work with are balance. So what we'd like to do is start priming these centers, helping them to balance so that if the Kundalini comes through, if the energy, if the erotic currents of life force that kind of wakens and enlivens these centers comes through, it doesn't cause the same kind of Kundalini effect. And I've really been working with this because I'm in my Uranus opposition, and all women, or all of us actually, at midlife end up having a Uranus opposition that sort of awakens this part of our bodies, right? And it's just always recommended that we slightly stimulate the centers versus having them peak forward. So the root chakra really is the beginning of where Eros comes from, like where it enters the body or where it's generated. The Kundalini that comes up, right? The upward facing or upward directed energy. And a lot of times what happens when we don't have a balanced root chakra is that kundalini will either, because we're living inside of survival and fear and scarcity, and so there's a lot of gripping and attempts at control. um it's like there isn't an opening for that kundalini to arise, and so the rest of the centers can be just deeply out of balance because that central channel isn't open, or we can end up feeling very dry and brittle because the root chakra is kind of the thing that's pulling everything out of balance. Or if we're too open, if we don't have enough containment, if we don't have a strong grounded root chakra, um, we end up having the kundalini come through and cause chaos. Essentially, kundalini is chaos, right? So we could think of the central pole, that axis, as order, coherence, right? And the kundalini, what it does is it comes in just like the archetype of the trickster, and it breaks up ossifications, crystallizations, rigidness, and it brings us back into almost a romantic or like a courtly love with life again, with the ecstatic nature of reality and the sense that we're in a co-creative space or relationship with all of nature. And so there are just so many layers of the root chakra that need to be spoken about, because essentially, what we would optimally like to have happen is that there is a nice enough opening for the eros to come through, and then through the movement of the sacral chakra, that eros is kind of grabbed and churned and sent on its first spiral up. Now, given that, I think one of the really useful analogies for what the root is, like, of course, the roots of a tree are a useful analogy, and I would use them, they're helpful. But as women, as people who are on a specific spiritual path, this path of the red thread, right? This kind of rose lineage path. And the reason that this month I chose the archetype of Isis as Great Mother and High Priestess, essentially those two archetypes in and of themselves become the archetype of like the queen, right? Or there's this sense of nobility, responsibility, right? So like a sobriety, but it's not a sobriety without eros. It's not a dry sobriety. It's not all responsibility. But there is this sort of maturation, this ability to create and hold that comes through the root chakra. And so one of the other really useful analogies for the root chakra is like, this is our throne, right? This is right where the perineum hits the ground. And asking ourselves, what is our relationship to that? And this month, as we're on the descent journey, right? It's not about building something. It's not about adding something. It's not about visualizing the throne that we want to sit on and how it might feel to sit on that throne. It's more about investigating and being in inquiry with what the relationship to the throne is now. So I want to talk a little bit about, and I always write things down because I won't remember them. Like, what is the throne, right? And so essentially it is our sense of being rooted, being grounded. And being grounded essentially is that idea of having the roots in the ground. It's not like we could imagine like the element of air, right? The root chakra is the element of earth because there's some gravity, there's some gravitas, there's something holding us, rooting us. If you imagine a leaf that blows, from the wind and that's disconnected from the tree, that's more like Eros, right? It's got a more erotic or chaotic sense to it. And so there's this sense of sort of like containment or coherence here. It's this sense of being safe in the world, right? It's not, it's true safety. It's not safety that's sourced in fear or scarcity. It's this sense of safety that's sourced in trust, like deep trust in that connection to the benevolent source of love that is always guiding our lives. It's trust in source in a sense. Um, the root chakra is also about intimacy and ecosystem health. Like, think about it. One of the things we talked about on our journey so far is this idea of hyper independence and how that is really sending women into those archetypes that are rigid and armored and unpenetrable, or there's like an over masculine here. And so when we think about what is true grounding, or what does it mean to sit on our throne in our throne room, we want to inspect the quality of our relationships, our partnerships. It's not about codependence, it's about interdependence, and like, who is in service to the throne with you, right? Who is helping to serve the throne? You can't just ground all the time on your own. It doesn't mean, like I said, that you're creating like enmeshment or codependencies. It's really about dancing the paradox between independence and sovereignty, and the the interrelatedness of needing co-regulation, needing an ecosystem to function properly, right? It's that idea of like the roots going into the ground and the mycelium feeding them. It's like creating a particular network. And truly being able to ground is having other bodies, other nervous systems that are relatively healthy around you. It doesn't mean you'll always need those things to ground, but it doesn't mean that those things shouldn't be available to you. And I think in modern spirituality, we keep talking about the root as though it's a singular project, when really, what we're tending to is the place where the roots hit the ground, and the synergy between those two, right? How they feed and nourish each other. The throne is about self-holding, right? And so while we need others to help us co-regulate from time to time, there's a paradox in here that like we need to be able to hold others and hold ourselves. And so it's about negotiating those relationships when we step into those roles in a healthy, boundaried way. It is most definitely about connection to a living source of love. This idea of the throne and of the queen, if we think about really what the queen was, and I wrote some of this in the archetypal explanation for this month in our guardian goddesses handout. We talked about the high priestess, and the high priestess being a archetype really of Virgo, and Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and how there's this sort of marriage or the synergy between the high priestess and the idea of magic and the magician. Magi meaning like mother genie. It's the combination of like, it could be those two words, right? What is the mother genie? And this ability to create worlds, this ability to weave and thread reality into existence. And that's really something that we work with deeply as we move down into the Earth Star chakra. And I'll tell you why. So there is the gods, right? The goddesses, which Isis is one, or all of the different pantheons of the goddesses, or you can think of Freya, or from whatever, mm, whether it's the Scandinavian gods, whatever pantheon you'd like to choose, right? And in all of these pantheons, they have a figure inside of them called like the Norns or the Morai or the three fates. And these are the weavers of fate, the weavers of destiny. And these beings, these three beings, sometimes it's more, but usually it's three. These three beings are said to be older and more powerful than all of the gods, right? And so there's this sense that as we pass through the root chakra gateway, especially kind of like, yeah, no, I think this whole cradle, actually, I don't want to say one side or the other. This whole cradle of like passing down through like an initiatory gateway, being held by the Earth star, and then, moving towards the ascent side. It's like, in order to become the weaver of worlds, it's almost as if we need to take on that queenly throne-like quality, that initiation of responsibility, this capacity to create worlds, right? And to weave reality into existence, to be a weaver of fate rather than just a passive receiver of fate. And so there is this cultivation in the root chakra of this relationship to a living source of love, a beneficent, right? A beneficial, a benefactor, somebody who has um, that intention of gifting us with grace and blessings. There is a living source of love that we can never be separated from, a living source of love that adores us and cherishes us in whatever form we come in, not when we're good, not when we're moral or ethical or in our rightness, but there is this deep sense of trust that we incarnated for a reason, and that everything that comes about in our incarnation has somehow is connected to some deeper thread, some deeper mystical thread that we don't fully understand. And so if you feel unworthy or unloved, the root chakra is really a place to kind of shore that up, right? To work on the beliefs around unworthiness and unlovability, and to strengthen that connection towards like, so even if you feel unlovable, like that, you cannot find the full evidence for that, because the connection to the living source of love that you have cultivated is so strong that even if all of the out picturing shows that everybody dislikes us and that we are just inherently unworthy and unlovable, that we can't quite believe that, because we know that there is a beneficial source of love that we are connected to, like a guiding hand that is taking care of us. I have a friend, a dear friend, who is extraordinarily lovable, but her own wounding from being a child has left her really in self-doubt around that. And so it's been a big area that she's been putting attention on. And she moved kind of for a spiritual reason out of her house back in at the I want to say either at the end of 2021 or the beginning of 2022. I can't quite remember exactly what gateway we were in. But when that living situation ended, she did not have something lined up to step into. And so she has lived on this kind of like spiritual quest of moving from kind of place to place to place to place, kind of very in an unrooted way. But like that paradox I talk about, grounding into groundlessness, she has continued to hold many of her responsibilities and to trust that God, goddess, source, whatever you want to call it, has a next place for her lined up. Like she has had a warm bed in a welcoming house again and again and again for almost 2 years. That's pretty incredible. And she has said that like her trust, her capacity to trust this um, benevolent source of love that's guiding her life has increased. And I don't really know how we do magic or do life or do safety and control in a healthy way without cultivating this deep sense of trust in a benevolent living source of love, right? There's also this other thing that I really love in relationship to the throne and grounding in this beneficent living source of love that we can bring in here um, as a project that's larger than us as well. Because once we start to dig into some of the shadows of the root chakra, I mean, essentially it comes down to two that then feed other branches, right? And it's this idea of fear and separation, right? Like there's this idea that we're separate, cut off from, exiled from, not rooted, right? And the same kind of picturing of the roots going into the mycelium that we're using as an analogy for the root chakra is this idea that that not only are we connected to this benevolent living source of love, but that we are also interconnected with everything, like Indra's net. Like there is this deep connection between us and everything else, and that nothing happens. There's not a ripple that happens in this net over here that isn't felt and trickled down. And so there's this sense of um, paradox again of, both rooting in as an individual and claiming or sitting on our own individual throne and this deep sense of tribal and community connection that's involved here. And if we think about rooting, a lot of times, like when I will do a root chakra meditation, for instance, one of the things I'll kind of do is visualize my root chakra kind of reaching down and kind of like with like a cord or a tail or a snake or a thread or whatever, like, or an anchor, um, whatever analogy you like to use, symbolism wise, and kind of making a circle around the core of the earth, just to hold on to the core of the earth. And if we imagine that as alchemists, right, that core of the earth is this like deep kind of gunmetal gray, um, molten lead uh, mixture or substance, right? That's like churning, but it's also dense and it's so dense that it's keeping us in line in the solar system. It is keeping us in our orbit in the solar system. But then also that lead is the thing that the alchemists are turning to gold, right? It is the thing that the alchemists are working on. And so if we imagine that each of us as priestesses, as women, as people who incarnated for this age of Aquarius incarnation transition team, if we are all rooting into this molten core of the earth, this kind of deep alchemical elixir that sits at the center, right, of our earth, of Mama Gaia, where that living source of love pulsates from. I love to think about it in this dual aspect of that it pulses from the center of the universe and it pulses from the center of the earth. So we are anchoring our throne deep into this core as a way to kind of hold us here. And we are all doing it from this interconnected place. How that all of the work we are doing is feeding this central uh, lead ball, this lead crystal, whatever you want to, think about it as, and how this is our collective contribution as priestesses to lighten that lead, like to create gold, alchemical gold from the the substance of what is at the core right now, and how that alchemy is radiating out just like this living source of love does. And it is touching into all of the different corridors of the planets, all of the different lands and peoples are um, having access to your own work with your own throne. Now, one of the things that I hold deeply as a priestess, as a mother, as an incarnate vessel at this time is this vision with Sky Dancer, and that this work, all of it, I've really taken time to trace it back, is all sourced in the rose line of the Magdalene, of the goddess, this red thread that we are all cultivating, right? From different places on the planet. It is this descent of spirit into matter, right? This road of moving from the transcendent realms deep into the world of the mother that is sort of subterranean and soul level. This red thread of death and rebirth, you know, um, death and resurrection as a new being. This is all the red thread. Every single initiation I've been on in my life has been connected to this. Like my own exile from my mother, right? The red line is all about mother child, kind of like lineage, what we're giving birth to when we're here. Even if we don't have human children, it's about what we are creating, being creator beings, being the magician, being Isis who can create worlds, being Sophia and embodying the wisdoms of the Shekinah, right? I have this vision with Sky Dancer of like, you know, I really don't want to sound derogatory in any way, shape, or form, because I have so much reverence for women on this path that do this work, and however that looks for them, I really I honor it. I totally honor it as my sisters. And I think that whatever gateway someone needs into this work is the gateway they enter through, and who am I to judge? However, one of the things I've really noticed for myself is this deep commitment, and I notice it with red thread women, right? That even if they don't know how to, I don't want to use the word execute because that's not a great word. Even if they don't know how to manifest this exactly, the yearning, the desire for it is really deep, and that is just like walking this path of truth and authenticity, knowing that it isn't even love that is the highest frequency. It's actually authenticity, right? And for me, what I've noticed is that, like, I don't have what I would call in Arabic the nifis. It's like that kind of like spice of life to really glamorize or dress up. Like, I like fine things, I like looking nice, but I would much rather be like deep in the shamanic realms of the psyche and just wearing all black or whatever, you know, um, rather than uh, put my energy into a path of beauty. And I want to say, like, again, I have so much reverence for people who do. Like, I'm a Scorpio, so this makes sense for me. But people who are Libras, Pisces, Cancers, all types of Gemini, I mean, really, any sign can be deeply creative and deeply committed to the beauty way, the path of beauty, and making beauty in the world. The friend I just mentioned, oh my gosh, she is incredible in like design and beauty and proportion and colors and templates, and her creativity on the physical level is just brimming with um, genius. That's all I can say. So, not to denigrate that path at all. I hope you can hear how much reverence I have for it and how much reverence I have for being in spaces that have been beautified by somebody's love, by somebody's mastery and creativity. And I've noticed that for people where it's not that that's not a skill of mine, if I did put time and attention into it, I can create really great things. It's just not a hugely strong pull to work in the external for me. And I have found that it can be a sense of like it's an extra obstacle or an extra burden if you're not somebody who has access to the material spiritual stuff, right? Or doesn't really want to work with those things, but still wants to be deeply spiritual. And so I've been thinking with Sky Dancer, like, gosh, the more I show up as authentic, like I am a mother from middle America. You know, we all have a deep story. And I know that people have been drawn to my story because parts of it are really tragic, right? And I think we're interested in knowing how people can walk through tragedy and stay alive and maybe even thrive. So I understand the interest in my story, but it's not really any more special than our own stories are, right? Everybody has a fascinating story. It's what I've learned as an astrologer. It's part of what I love about doing one-on-one work is really hearing how the archetypes have been animated through people and their own mythologies and their own stories. So everybody has a story and everybody has the capacity to priestess. And so one of the visions I've been holding with Sky Dancer and this work is that, we don't need to go to Hawaii or LA or Austin or Asheville to be a spiritual person. We can start right where we are in our own towns with what we have, with who we are in our, I wear a mom uniform every day, yoga pants, sweatshirts, ton of shoes. I work out and I end up staying in my workout clothes. We can be priestesses and give pastoral care to our communities and be deeply transforming the grids of our own towns without the need to have anything special about us or that looks special on the outside about us. It's about knowing that there is gold inside of us, and that is part of the root chakra. It's that deep abiding sense of confidence might not be the right word. I think it's deeper than confidence. It's knowing, right? It's just a deep knowing that our presence, like Libra or Venus in Libra, that tuning fork, our deep presence can shift the environment, and not just the environment in a small space, but the environment around us, that we can grid our towns. And so one of the visions I hold with Sky Dancer is this kind of red rose blooming from the hearts of every city across the globe, not just in America, and a red line, mothers, wives, priestesses, doesn't matter, women of all forms coming together, in the etheric, like these etheric connections or networks of temples, really helping to seed this new frequency on earth that is in some ways new and in some ways very old, right? And I want to speak to, because I've said mother a lot, and I a little bit I worry about this. I have a I have a priestess sister and she is a leader, and she has been on this path with me for a really long time. And I don't think I could have gotten through Tanner's death without her. She sent me some beautiful oils that she made herself and this really gorgeous letter. And she's very good. She's another one who's very good with beautifying things. She sent me on this deep maroon, which is like the frequency of the Great Mother. This deep maroon piece of paper with gold writing. She talked to me about who I was right after Tanner died. Like, I witness you as Psychopomp, escorting your son, to his new home. Things like this. I mean, it was deep, and it was filled with strength, and how she saw me as um this holy being, right? And so there was something in that for me. She priestessed me through this, where and I was just collapsing. I was waking up wondering how I was going to stay alive. And she does not have children. Her energy is so, it is the frequency of mother in a way that I can't even explain. And the frequency of mother, what mother really is this energy that helps to anchor souls in bodies. That's what it does. It helps to um, retrieve soul fragments with people, and it helps people to keep themselves and their souls whole. And so if you are not a mother, there is still an opportunity for you to be doing the work of the mother, of the great mother, by helping your community keep their soul anchored into their bodies, fully here, fully present while they are incarnate on earth. And we are at and I don't like doomsday prophecies, but we really are at a crossroads here where there is going to be splitting timelines. There's going to be like a synthetic, deeply disembodied, highly mental, very airy, very masculine, very ideological timeline available to us. And then there's going to be one that's organic and human available to us. And this organic human timeline, keeps us anchored to our soul and keeps us rooted into the earth, right? And so that is the path that I see of the mother. So mother doesn't mean that we have to have children. In one iteration it can, but it doesn't mean that we have to. It's that energy, it's that frequency that is mother. It's really interesting too, because the other archetype that really rules Saturn and Capricorn and can rule the root is this connection to the crone. It was so interesting today. So I took a walk. I'll post some pictures with this video. I took a walk, and I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, up by Lake Erie. And the area of the country I'm in, really has 4 full, definitive, distinct seasons. And so, I really get that wheel of the year. Like, it lives through me. We lived in Houston for a little bit, my husband and I, and like the weather doesn't change that much. And I remember how unmoored I felt. Like I almost need the seasons to live with me. Anyways, this is kind of a fallow time of year right before spring hits. And spring is pretty dead on for us here. Like when the equinox happens is around when we'll start getting those first like real embers of spring. But it's not so snowy here anymore. So I was on a path, I was on a walk in the valley where I like to spend a lot of time because it's completely immersed in nature. And I was walking, by the river, but there was a lot of land between the river and the path. So the river was sort of like half a football's field away from me. And in the center is forest. And so when it's spring and summer, it's got lots of foliage and trees, and you can barely see the river. But because everything is bare and fallow still from the winter, you could see through the trees to the river. And there were so many fallen trees, like trees that had been felled through the wind, through nature, through time going by. And it felt like sort of this walking through like the valley of fallen queens in a way. I don't know why that came to me. At first I'm like, this is like the valley of kings, and I'm like the valley of trees and like the valley of queens. And I have a few trees that are around this space that I like to go put my back up against, and I'll sit, like I'm sitting on a throne. So my bottom's kind of in the air and my legs are kind of out. So it's like I'm in a sitting position and my back is just absorbing all of I'll hug the trees too. I really love trees. They're like a huge part of my self-care routine interacting with them. They're very, very wise, very, very old, very, very alive and animate. So anyways, I kind of did this today with my back, and I throned the tree, and I like to think of it as throning. And the reason that like I leave a little bit of space between my bottom and the tree is so that I can absorb through my root, the energy that comes up through the roots of the trees. It isn't always possible for me to sit on the root. The roots here are pretty thin, and so it's not comfortable to sit on the roots. If you have trees around you where you can sit directly on the root, do that and put your back up against them. If not, you can throne the tree, and that's what I call it, throning. And so I left that area, and then I came to a crossroads. Like I came, there was a place where the path split in three. One of the many things that the crone is Hecate, right? And we say Hecate is the crone at the crossroads. And one of the other things that I really love about like the queen archetype and the root and like what the root has available to us is this capacity, like we said, wisdom to know and to confidently take a path. Like when we're in our princess or maiden zone, when we come to a crossroads in life, right? We can spend a lot of time mentally looping, mentally going over like fear, scarcity, like issues of codependency about like, if I choose this path, I'm letting this person down. But whereas like the queen archetype is on her throne and she chooses what is best for her, knowing that what is best for her is best for her path and ultimately for her incarnation. And when we are doing the things that enrich and nourish us, we are the largest contribution we can be to the planet, right? It's kind of about choosing the small story or the big story. It's like, are we feeding that that lead turning into gold that ripples out and affects the whole planet? Or are we feeding the needs of other people? And it doesn't mean that in certain contexts that you wouldn't consider other people's needs. Like if you are in a sacred contract with a person, like a marriage, a partnership, if you are a daughter or a parent yourself, there are times that, yes, you might choose as being aligned with your own path, the path of sacrifice, right? Of sacred sacrifice, where you're doing something that elevates another person's needs over your own. But we don't do that kind of path of sacrifice for kind of like inconsequential relationships, or in service to codependency out of fear or scarcity or out of what people might think of us, because we're not living our most elevated path inside our incarnation when we're doing that. And so I wanted to bring that up, that part of balancing the throat chakra or the root chakra is having our priorities and boundaries really in place, right? So where we know that, when we need to prioritize ourself and our truth and our path, and we can do it in neutrality and rightness and gnosis versus, like the maiden or the priestess or the princess archetypes or the damsel archetypes can get kind of worried about like what other people think because they're prizing that idea of belonging, or a false idea of belonging over the authentic path. There's nothing wrong with it. If you find that you've done that, it's not a big deal. You can always take a moment to be on the throne. And really what I'd like you guys to do is not worry much about shifting the energetics, as I'd like you to become aware of what your relationship is to the throne now. And then on the upside, as we are working very deeply with these chakra centers and calling the soul back home and activating the queen's codes, because we'll be starting from the place of the throne, right? And this is going to be a Venus Leo Gemini toned. And so, Gemini really is the alchemical priestess. It is the multidimensional, can work within worlds, can work in the multiplicity, can work with lots of different threads. So it's going to be such an exciting ascent journey. But right now, what we want to do is really just look at, like, even my throne needs work, right? It needs a little bit of braiding and tightening up. And, there are times I want to collapse, or times I'm in the damsel, or times that I'm codependent, or I don't want the responsibility, or I'm not in right relationship with responsibility, in the sense that, one of the things that I've been working on myself is that, like, I'll ask for support, right, or help, and then I'm still the marionette leader who wants to pull all the strings of how people support me. So I'm still, in over responsibility and control, even when I'm calling in support for myself. I never really sink into the trust that other people are going to hold me, even if I don't like it's not my preference of how I'd like to be held, but just acknowledging that the support is there, and that if I can surrender to like not caring about the outpicturing of how that support shows up, that it actually then translates to real support. So I just want to double check my notes, because I have been talking quite a bit and I don't want to wear you guys out. I just want to make sure that I have touched on anything. Oh, yes. Okay. I want to talk about some of the shadow sides of the root chakra. So how many of us, and I'll raise my hand at the beginning here so you don't feel like outed. How many of us have an identity that is synonymous with pain, suffering, feuding, grinding, drama, trauma, victimhood, martyrdom, which is really codependency? All of these things are a type of cynicism. Like when we're inside, think about it, we're inside the frequency of victimhood or martyrdom, or that idea of needing to grind, right? All of those things lead to safety and control structures being erected in our lives. Like it's a very tight, grippy energy. There's not a lot of permeability in it. And inside of our capacity to self-hold, we really want, yes, we want boundaries, but we want things to be able to come in and out. We want walls that have doors and windows and stuff in them. We don't just want like concrete walls. And when we're inside a psyche or a mentality that tells itself it's traumatized, tells itself, goes and seeks out drama, is always in a story of martyrdom or victimhood. Essentially, what those do is they give us the excuse to stay tight. They reinforce these ideas that we aren't safe. And it actually relieves us of the responsibility of the queen. Like if we are always in danger and our minds are just constantly using our energy to be looking at being in scarcity, dealing with our whole energy force is filled with survival, filled with, what other people think about us, all of those other things, we actually can't really step into full and true responsibility, because responsibility is spacious. It has different crossroads that it can take, and take confidently, right? But that system is very tight, and those are shadows of the root, all of them, because the exalted form of the root is trust, connection to the bigger thing, right? That benevolent source of love, and that capacity to create worlds, this capacity to hold our own creations, right? And so, when we've always got the trauma drama happening, really, what is our ability to create, right? So I want to leave you with that question. I want to leave you with that question. And I want to leave you with the inquiry around what our relationship is now to the throne. We'll work that out on the other side, how we want it to be. But just right now, looking at what the relationship is so that we're in relationship with reality. And not from a place where there's anything wrong, right? We're not looking to shame or guilt ourselves, just looking at what it is from a place of neutrality, from a place of curiosity, from a place of inquiry. Okay. And if you find stuff, make some notes because they will be important on our other side, but not right now. Okay. All right. Loving you all. Thank you so much. I appreciate you tuning in to the transmission.